So my question is, well, with your friendship with Sunhouse, I wanted to ask what was the highlight of that friendship?
Friendship is probably because he would talk about people like Charlie Patton and Robert Johnson as people that he knew as his friends, and they were like mythical characters to me. To have somebody talk about Robert Johnson as just being a young man who stole his songs, whatever, that was always interesting to me.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. And I don't know, what was the most, I guess, you used the word mythical. What was the most mythical story you were told about these guys?
Well, we never believed the Crossroads story
Oh, really?
that he had got, Robert had gone to the Crossroads and learned to play guitar really well in exchange for giving his soul to the devil. We never believed that. And we never believed in none of the older bluesmen like Son and Booker or John Hurt or Skip James. None of them ever believed that song, that story. That story was made up by white people who couldn't rationalize how Black people could learn to play guitar so well. So they used a mythical story of the Crossroads. But we never believed the story.
Yeah. And I'll just ask this one more thing. So, what was Sunhouse's interpretation then of, you know, I guess Robert Johnson's son ability to play? Well, how did he interpret that?
Well, there was a period of a couple of years where Robert went away. Those are the places that Robert went to Canada or Robert went to New York. I figure it was like 1934 to 36, something like that. A couple of years, Robert was gone out of the Delta. And then when he came back, Son said he sure had got his learning, that he had gotten to be very, very good. But I don't think it was any tricks. I just think that he played hard, he practiced hard, and he got good. I have to take a phone call. Stay with me here.
When and how did you get interested in the blues that got you in managing the careers of the musicians?
Well, I started in folk music in Cambridge about 1962, 63. And then I promoted a week of shows of Mississippi John Hurt, who was probably the first one who attracted me into country blues. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. So I promoted a week of shows with John Hurt, and I was very successful. So we followed that up by promoting shows with Booker White. And we got to talking to him, and we played him music by Sunhouse and Skip James and Robert Johnson. And we asked him if he had ever seen any of these people. And he said he had seen Sunhouse coming out of a movie theater in Memphis, which later turned out to be a lot of bullshit. But anyway, we asked him. So he said he had seen Sunhouse coming out of a movie theater. So that back in those days, that was all we needed to pack up a Volkswagen and head for Memphis. So we got down there in June of 64. And of course, nothing that he said was true. And we had to start looking for Sun from that point. So we found a man who had been married to Sunhouse's stepdaughter. And we tracked her down, and she said that her stepfather was still alive. Now, this was over 20 years since he had been recorded by Lomax in the 40s. This was in 64. So she said he was still alive. So she gave us the name and phone number of a man named Jim Knox, who said that he knew where Sun was. So he went and got Sunhouse and brought him to the telephone. And on June 21, 1964, we talked to Sunhouse on the telephone. We said, are you the one who knew Robert Johnson and knew Charlie Patton and recorded for Lomax? And he said, hey, that's me. I done all them things. And he said, yeah, I know those fellas. So we said, that's it. We got people that listen to your music. And so we're on our way. He was in Rochester, New York. And we were in Mississippi. We had come down from Memphis into Mississippi. So we said, okay, stay where you are. And it took us 2 days to get from Mississippi up to Rochester. And that's when we found him. We found him and we recorded it. We got to talking to him about Charlie Patton and Robert Johnson and Alan Lomax and Library of Congress. And so that's when we knew that we had found the great Sunhouse.
Really cool. Can you tell us any stories he told you?
What was that?
Can you tell us any stories he told you about, like Charlie Patton, Willie Brown, or Robert Johnson?
Well, Sun told us stories about them. He told more stories to me when I was traveling with him in the years after that. We talked about Charlie Patton and we talked about Robert Johnson. So I had more stories going with him over the coming years after that.
Oh, I see. So, may I ask if how did Sunhouse's first performance go since his rediscovery?
Well, he didn't have any stories or jokes or way of introducing his songs. He just kind of played the music such as it was. And later, as we got to 1965 or 66 or so, he got stories that he told in introducing his songs. But at the beginning, he didn't have any stories. You know, he just started the songs and that's all there was to it. But he was absolutely glorious in his performing. He was a great, great blues singer, and he didn't need any tricks or inspiration to do that. He was a great blues singer.
Hey, I thought I would ask Dick if he, well, I had two questions really. One would be, would you have any kind of, I mean, with all your experience, any kind of recommendations or advice to somebody who wanted to get into promoting music and concerts? And second question would be, could you just talk a little bit about Lightning Hopkins?
Lightning Hopkins was different from any of the other bluesmen that I worked with in that he played amplified. Son and Skip and John and Booker and the others, they all played simple acoustic guitar. But Lightning played on electric, which made him different. Lightning also could make a song up about anything. That Son and Skip, they had their own songs, but Lightning could make a song up on the spot about anything, about coming to play or, you know, his guitar or the job or anything. Lightning was a more spontaneous musician, whereas the others had their songs already written. Lightning was also very smooth. It was I'm not sure what I mean by smooth, but being amplified, that he more or less made his own songs up electric, and it was easier to go with by that means.
Yeah, I was just also going to ask if he had any tips for somebody who wanted to promote concerts or get into music promotion in general. Any kind of tricks of the trade, secrets?
You mean to promote a blues man now?
To promote any music.
Well, you have to love the music yourself. You really have to love what you're doing and try to persuade people that it's something that they want to see. In other words, that it helps if they have an album out, a CD out, and to get the people to come and hear it. You know, I'm sure there are musicians in your area that have an album out, and you have to get a place to do it, a club or something, and then just sort of spread the word that this person would be there. And it's kind of not any more complicated than that. You get people to come and hear it and promote it and see if the album will bring enough people.
That's pretty cool. Thank you.
So how did you feel when you found out that Alan Lomax knew that Sunhouse was living in Rochester and didn't spread that information to anyone?
We were at Newport, I think 65 or so, and Lomax came onto the grounds, and Son looked up and said, "Here come that old booger Lomax." He recognized him. And so Lomax came over and he said, "You're still living in Rochester near the bridge?" And Son said, "Yeah, I'm still there." So I was astounded. I said, "He knew where you were all this time?" And Lomax said, "Yeah, he knew, but he just didn't feel it necessary to tell people where Son was. It just didn't seem important to him." So I was really furious because I felt that people had been robbed of years of his music. And he could have been making records or touring or whatever. And Lomax never told anybody where he was. But I think that's more commentary on Lomax than anything else.
Could you just tell us more about Alan Lomax? I've always been very interested in him, and I'd be curious to know from somebody who met him and knew him, you know, what he was like, what kind of person he was, what role he played in all this music.
Well, I have great admiration for his father, John, who did great field recordings in the 30s and 40s, whatever. But Alan basically was pretty selfish with what he was doing with it. In other words, Lomax set up a recording of music and people, and he released a lot of the stuff that he recorded. He released it on his own label and got money for it. So Lomax had his own motives for doing it, which was not Library of Congress, that he was doing videos in the 60s of Son and Booker and Wolf and the others, and he was making those videos for his own profit, whereas his father, John, was doing the work strictly for the Library of Congress. So I'm a great admirer of John, but not so much of Alan.
So when Sunhouse retired from his second career as a bluesman in 1974, for what after his after the end of his second career as a bluesman, what did he do between the years he retired up until his death in 1988?
Well, really nothing. He went back to doing what he had been doing before I found him, just living a quiet life with his wife and getting Social Security. Now, occasionally, somebody would come with a tape recorder and would come to his apartment in Rochester, and they would bring a bottle of wine or liquor and get him drunk, and then they would record him. And some of those albums are out, and it's unfortunate that I couldn't protect him any better than I did. I didn't want that drunken music to be released, but there are albums out that are called Sunhouse at Home and things like that. And that's just music that people made when they came to his house with a bottle of wine and they got him drunk and recorded him.
What do you think are the main differences of the blues scene from the 60s compared to now, do you think? Because I know you still go around and see some concerts. I mean, what do you think is the main difference now, and what makes it different today than it did in the past?
Well, there are young white people who play the blues, who play acoustic blues, like Paul Rochelle and John Hammond and John Mooney and people like that. They play the acoustic blues, but the very few Black musicians working as solo career. There's Guy Davis, might be one, and occasionally a couple, but there are very, very few Black musicians working as a solo career. I mean, it's almost impossible to make a living at it.
Oh yeah, I was actually wondering about this specific photo that was taken in, I believe it says here 1965 in Newport. It appears right here. Hold on, it's Sunhouse with a dreadnought guitar. I was wondering that if this was his guitar or if someone lent him this at any stage.
No, that was probably given to him just for one song, because he only played Steel Body Nationals when he was on tour. In other words, we would, unfortunately, he couldn't have a guitar at home because he would pawn it and drink the money from selling his steel body. So we couldn't get him a steel body to take home because he would just pawn it. Okay. Occasionally, when he was not where I had the National, he would play a wooden guitar or anything else that they gave him.
Okay. This is regarding Skip James. How was he like to manage?
He was very, very difficult. He was very contrary, and he had an ego, and he simply believed that the music that he was playing was superior to the music of, let's say, John Hurt or Sunhouse or the others. He figured their music was just ordinary music, but he was capable of writing more complex songs, and he was a better musician. But Skip had an ego and just simply believed he was a better musician.
Right, because I had in the past on like, I think you were on stage, there was footage of you on stage at a certain festival. You described Skip James to be quite a pain to deal with, quite hard to manage. And I was wondering what specifically had made him hard to manage. So that's answered my question. Thank you. I'll let someone else answer the question now, if that's okay.
How did a lot of those old bluesmen interact with each other?
Well, they interacted with each other as for where they were from. Some of them had lived in the north. John Hurt continued to live in the south, in Avalon, Mississippi. Booker White lived in Memphis. Son, of course, lived in Rochester. That, in other words, they interacted with each other. They were courteous, but not warm and friendly. In other words, just whatever their personalities were. John Hurt was very outgoing and friendly and warm. Skip was withdrawn and not friendly at all. That Skip had an ego that he felt he was better than any of the others. Son really didn't feel his music was majestic. I use the word majestic because I think that he was he played his music in a really outgoing format. In other words, that he played it loud and straight, whereas the others did not. That I think Son was a great musician, but he never put it out there as being good as far as his ego was concerned. In other words, he felt that his music was, I don't know, it's just really hard to explain. Son never felt his music was outgoing and was commanding. I'll use that word. Son never felt his music was commanding, but it was. It was loud and with the steel body that his music in the Charlie Patton style was outgoing. Skip's music could be very quiet with extremely brilliant finger picking. John Hurt was a brilliant finger picking, but his material was more in the songster style than that of the actual blues.
How did Sunhouse talk about Charlie Patton?
Well, Patton had already had recording success in the 1920s. So Patton took Son to Paramount with him in 1930, and Son had his one commercial recording for Paramount in 1930. But Charlie Patton had recorded in the 1920s, so he already was a well-established professional musician before Sunhouse came onto the scene. Son had great respect for Charlie because he was a professional who had recorded many songs before he came onto the scene.
Is there anybody that you wish you would have had the chance to work with that you never got to?
Well, Robert, of course. We all wish we could have worked with Robert. I think I would have liked to have worked with Blind Lemon Jefferson. He was a really brilliant songwriter. And of course, the great Blind Willie Johnson. I don't know if you're familiar with Blind Willie Johnson, that played a 12-string and came from Georgia. He may have been one of the greatest of all time.
Coming from Boston, how were you able to overcome the cultural, age, and geographic differences that existed between you and your African American artists?
See, I was just in the business of making them money. It was as simple as that. I found work for them, and they went out and played and made money for them. Robert P. Williams and Fred McDowell and big boy, crude up, whatever. I found work for them. In other words, we never talked a lot about the sociological differences between us.
Who was your favorite person to photograph and work with?
They were like my children. I loved them all. I loved them all equally. I really loved Fred McDowell and Robert Pete Williams. They were wonderful, wonderful people. Wonderful men. I'm not sure which one I would pick as a favorite. John Hurt was so easy to work with, and Fred McDowell was easy to work with, and Son could be difficult at times, and Skip was always difficult.
So I have a question about kind of the way when Sunhouse used to play his guitar, he kind of just, his arm went all over the place. So how exactly kind of did he strum like very specific strings of that range of motion? Did he ever say anything about the way he strummed?
Well, he would actually pick individual strings, but he could also just strum all of the strings simultaneously. He would do that when he brought the slide up. When he ripped the slide up the neck of the guitar, he would simply strum all of the strings and would get more volume out of it that way.
So a mystery with Charlie Patton is that percussive sound in his recordings, how he so it's thought that he played the guitar while hammering the top of it. So did Sunhouse ever mention anything about Charlie Patton using any percussive technique on his guitar?
Well, I'm sure he would have if I had thought to ask him the question.
Also, he didn't know?
No. In other words, we never got around to talking about how Charlie played or Robert or any of the others. You know, it was just that the way Son would play. Now, I don't play guitar myself, so therefore I didn't have a chance to ask him about how he played.
Oh, Mr. Waterman, what do you feel about the success of Forever on My Mind?
Well, I'm very pleased. In other words, that Dan Auerbach's label succeeded in getting reviews in all of the blues and jazz publications, and the album has been seen as far as excuse me, as far as reviews are concerned. It's had reviews everywhere, and it will remain to see how it'll sell. But the reviews have been good, and it's been seen by all of the folk and blues publications.
So we all know who Willie Brown is. So they both traveled together with Sunhouse. So did Sunhouse ever talk to you about Willie Brown? So did he ever mention anything of maybe a potential photograph that could be still out there, or anything that he looked like?
Well, I don't know. See, Willie Brown is such a common name in the Delta that Robert Johnson refers to Willie Brown in the song lyrics. But we're not sure if it's the same Willie Brown that Sunhouse knew, although it probably is. I don't know of any photograph of Willie Brown. For that matter, I don't know of any photograph of Son when he was a young man.
I was just wondering, where do you see the future of the blues going? Because it feels as though now, and I don't know if it ever felt like this in the past, but it feels more so than ever that it's such a niche thing, and it's such a, you know, especially in the UK, you say to people, you know, oh, blues this, blues that, but sometimes they don't even know what you're talking about. I mean, where do you see the blues going in the future? If you think you have any projections of it, what do you think?
Well, I don't think the blues will ever die out, not as long as there are individual musicians who want to play it and record companies that want to record it. And there'll always be some small audience. There was a time when Eric Clapton did an album of Robert Johnson. That's probably the high point where Clapton did Robert Johnson. But I think that it's, just as long as guys like Warren Haynes from Government Mule and guys like Susan Tedeschi and her husband.
Oh yeah, they're wonderful. They're wonderful. Yeah.
Right. Okay. As long as people like that have an audience and keep wanting to play it, and the blues will never die. But I'm not sure if there's any widespread future for the blues. In other words, jazz seems to be able to exist as a solo or duo format, but blues is very, very difficult. Very difficult. So I don't know what the future is for blues, but I wouldn't be optimistic that it would grow from where it is right now.
Okay.
There was this photo in this forum that claimed that it was an early picture of Sunhouse. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but this was the picture. It was him and I think it was with, someone said it was his wife. Anything like this picture?
I think I've seen that, and I don't really have any comment on it. In other words, that I don't know for sure whether that's Sun. In other words, I can't tell if it's Sun or not.
Sunhouse and Howlin' Wolf. I saw this video where Howlin' Wolf was heckling Sunhouse's drinking problems, but
right. But now see, that comes back to Alan Lomax. See, Alan Lomax created that video. All of the musicians were at Newport for a festival. So Alan Lomax went out and got a room and filled it with liquor and had the bluesmen brought to this room late at night and then filmed it. And of course you get, what you expect to get. Those who have drinking problems are going to drink, and those who don't have drinking problems are going to scold the ones who do. So that's just one more commentary on Lomax, that he artificially created a drinking scene in which Sun was drinking too much. And Wolf, it gives the impression that Wolf was scolding Sun, and he was, but he had great affection for the old man. He really cared for him a lot and was distraught that Sunhouse had been drinking so much, and he was commenting on it. But it's really a commentary on Alan Lomax on creating a drunken scene so he could film it, so he could make a video to sell.
So for like all the other blues guys, not just Sunhouse, who knew Charlie Patton in person, so did they make any note of an account? So like people like Booker White, Skip James. I'm not sure if John Hurt knew Charlie Patton. Sunhouse and the other blues guys who knew Charlie Patton. So did they talk about any account with him or anything like significant, non-significant, just like any account they said up to you about Charlie Patton?
Well, I think Booker probably took some stylistic things from Patton, him being outgoing and, playing a very aggressive style of guitar. I don't think Skip ever met Charlie Patton, or if he did, he didn't mention it.
And John Hurt, I believe, didn't meet Charlie Patton.
No, John Hurt was just a quiet farmer, lived on a farm in Avalon, Mississippi, And I don't think that he ever traveled much. You know, he may have traveled to have done his recordings, but Charlie Patton played in the clubs and the juke joints and the bars, which John Hurt never did. So I don't think there would have been any interaction between the two of them.
And Sunhouse, what accounts did he make of Charlie Patton?
Well, he admired him greatly professionally because Charlie had already had many recordings by the time they met. Then Charlie took Sun with him in 1930 when Charlie and Sun and Willie Brown and Louise Johnson, they went off and recorded for Paramount in 1930. But Charlie Patton had recorded in the 1920s for Paramount. So he was way ahead of Sun as far as recordings were concerned.
So as a person, did they say he was like a good guy or kind of difficult? Did Sunhouse mention that if he was like kind of like a great person to be around or anything of the sort?
Charlie was sort of an outgoing jokester, kind of extrovert, and he kind of played the guitar in an open manner and more so than somebody, let's say, like Skip James, who was an introverted and played in a very quiet style. Charlie played his, outgoing style, and a lot of people copied that. Charlie was a much copied musician in his style.
Did Pete Seeger ever talk about Big Bill Broonzy?
No. Broonzy was more of a folk musician than a blues musician. And I never knew that Broonzy interacted with any of the Delta guys, certainly not Sun and Skip or any of the others. I never heard any interaction between Broonzy and the others.
Yeah, I think Broonzy was actually not even from the Delta at all. He was from Arkansas or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Broonzy was from Arkansas. Yes, that's true.
I think if he lived to the Newport festivals, that he would have done really well for himself. He was an amazing guitar player.
Right.
So right here, I was wondering how the different bluesmen got along with each other that Mr. Waterman here worked with.
Well, they all came from where they lived to play their jobs and make their money and go home. So they didn't really have a lot of opportunities to form friendships because they would either come to Newport or Chicago or wherever it was, and they would play a festival, make their money and go home. So they didn't have the opportunity to really form friendships while they were out traveling. Although they were all congenial with each other. Some of them were more extroverted, like Fred McDowell was very friendly. He was very outgoing. So Fred made friends with everybody. Some of the others, like Skip, they were more introverted. Fred was very friendly and very outgoing, and he was probably more outgoing than any of the others. Sun was not that friendly. Sun would stay by himself and just play his jig and go home.
Just quick curiosity, did you work with or at least met Muddy Waters, and was he nice to work with?
Oh yes, Muddy and I were good friends. Muddy, of course, had great respect for Sun, Sun was a major influence on Muddy in the late 1930s, in the early 40s. When Lomax came to record Sun in 41 and 42, he recorded Muddy Waters at the same time. He recorded Muddy on Stovall's plantation. And of course, Muddy went on to become such an influential figure in Chicago blues. But when Muddy first came to Chicago, his musical style was the Delta. That's what he came up north playing. So Muddy still played in his Delta style in the 1940s. And when he first began to record for Chess, he was still playing in his early Delta style.
You did mention that Sunhouse was a stepfather. Did Sunhouse himself have any children? And if he did, where are they now?
Sun never had any children of his own. His wife, Evie, had children, and they have passed away, and we're on a second generation of Evie House's children, but Sun never had any children of his own.
So you mentioned that Robert Johnson, he had gone to someplace in Canada, New York to get mentoring. But some people are saying on this one album cover I saw, it said a few songs from the man who taught Robert Johnson. So did Sunhouse actually do any mentoring to Robert Johnson?
Well, of course, Sun did walking blues first. Sun did preaching blues first. So there are several specific Robert Johnson songs, specific Sunhouse songs that Robert later recorded years later. Walking blues and preaching blues.
In general, how do you kind of feel that a young generation of people? So I believe most of us here were born after the year like 2000. I just want to know how you kind of feel that there's a new generation of young people that have taken an interest into the blues music. I was wondering how you felt about that.
Well, it seems it almost has to pass through the white musicians like John Mayall or the Rolling Stones or Eric Clapton or Van Morrison or people like that the influence on blues on them comes out through popular music. In other words, that if the Stones were to record a Sunhouse song or a Willie Brown song, that it would bring more popularity to them. But I don't think it's going to happen without it coming through white musicians.
I was going to ask you if you've seen this new book on Robert Johnson by, I believe, one of his siblings, Annie Anderson.
No, I didn't see it.
Or the first confirmed photo of Robert Johnson on this cover.
Well, I'm not sure. That's probably Robert. In other words, I think that we know that the one of him in the photo booth is authentic, and the other one where his fingers are all sprawled out like that, that's probably authentic. I'm not sure if any of the others are.
Yeah, this is the third photo that was actually confirmed. So I'd say that's kind of it for all the Robert Johnson's photos, because Annie Anderson, she with a man called Lauterbach, Mr. Batch, I believe his name is. He was given this photo of Robert Johnson, and he was told to put this as his cover. So this is a third confirmed photo of Robert Johnson. Before there was, I believe there was only two.
Right, I don't know. I can't authenticate it on that.
Hey, I thought I'd just ask if you knew Matt Lipscomb, and if you knew any other of those blues musicians from Texas, and what you can tell me or tell us about them.
From Texas.
Yeah, Matt Lipscomb, maybe. We already talked about Lightning Hopkins.
Well, there's Mance Lipscomb, who I was very fond of. Mance was from Navasota, Texas.
Mm.
Made a couple of very good albums on our Hulu.
Yeah, what was he like?
He was very quiet and good, clean finger picking style. More of a songster like John Hurt and less of a bluesman like Lightning.
Hmm.
What I wanted to say to sum up the Sunhouse situation was he was such a quiet man aside from his own music. He would be very quiet and diffident and not pushing himself out there. But when it came time to play, he would slash that National, slash that slide on the Steel Body National. And then he was just hell, man. He was just outgoing and extroverted and loud and a brilliant guitarist and one of the great Delta vocalists of all time. So in other words, when I talk about him only in terms about what we know about him. But he was really one of the great bluesmen of all time. That he could be really extroverted and playing very, very hard, and a great, great vocalist and a great human being. He was one of the great people that influenced my life. And in a positive way. He was a great musician and a great person.
I know this may be a bit of a broad question, but for everything you've talked about Sunhouse, is there anything that you feel that should be revealed about him that hasn't been revealed yet?
I'm not sure. I don't want the fact that he was quiet and withdrawn to take anything away from him, because when it came to playing, he was really top of the line. He was a great guitarist and he was a great slide guitarist. So in other words, he could really play and sing very, very well. That the fact that he was a quiet man and didn't push himself or he didn't think that he himself was a great musician, unlike Skip James, who wanted you to know that he was a great musician. And Skip was a great musician, but he had a lot of ego in that talking about it. But Sun was very quiet and withdrawn and really, really didn't have much to say about his performing. In other words, he didn't tell you what he was going to do. He just did it.
And did you ever, I'm not sure if you actually met them or worked with them, but did you meet Honeyboy Edwards and Johnny Shines?
Johnny Shines I knew because of his connection with Robert Johnson, that he traveled with Robert Johnson when the two of them would busk out on the streets together, and they would each take a corner of the sidewalk and they would play. So Johnny Shines knew Robert Johnson pretty well. Honeyboy, I think, fell under the spell of white people who wanted him to tell them Robert Johnson stories. And I think Honeyboy made up a lot of Robert Johnson stories that may not have been true, just to keep the myth going.
Oh. Well, I think that's it. A massive thank you. I've never thought that I was going to actually meet you. So to me, this is a great opportunity. I'll really thank you for your time, Mr. Waterman. And I hope everything else goes well for you.
No, that's it. about it.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can do this again some other time.
Okay. Bye-bye. Hope we do it again.
Take care.
All right.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.